Disclaimer: this is a fictional dramatization created for artistic, emotional, and educational storytelling purposes. All characters and events are entirely fictional and created using AI tools. No impersonation, misrepresentation, or harm is intended. The content contains scenes of danger involving child characters. However, no real persons or minors were involved in its production. Grace's Love Stories produces scripted, AI-generated stories that promote, entertain, inspire kindness, and emotional connection. We respect our viewers and strictly adhere to YouTube's policies.
The cold night air clung to my skin like a shroud, heavy with the scent of damp earth, pine, and the sacred smoke of silver birch burning in the ceremonial pits. A sliver of a blood moon hung in the sky, casting the sacred glade in hues of rust and shadow. Tonight was the night of the choosing, a ritual as old as our pack, and the air crackled with a tension so thick I could taste it, metallic and sharp, like a drawn blade. I stood in the back, a ghost in a plain gray dress, my purpose only to bear witness to my sister's ascension. The whispers followed me, slithering through the assembled pack like vipers in the grass. Disgraced, the wolfless Omega, Voron's shame. I kept my eyes fixed on the packed earth at my feet, feeling the weight of their judgment press down on me until it was hard to breathe. They were right, of course. I was a fracture in a perfect bloodline, and tonight was meant to heal that break by binding our family to the Alpha King. My sister, Ilara, was the center of it all. She stood near the great stone altar, a vision in white silk embroidered with silver thread that shimmered like captured moonlight. Her golden hair was intricately braided, her posture regal, her scent a confident bloom of honeysuckle and strength. She was everything a Luna should be, everything I was not. The ceremony was a formality, a performance for the pack. Everyone knew the Alpha King, Merrick Dravan, would choose her. It was a political necessity, a union of the two most powerful bloodlines. I was here as a shadow, a silent penance for my family's disgrace. My presence was a stark reminder of what could go wrong, a contrast that only made my sister shine brighter. But as the High Elder raised his hands to the sky, a tremor of pure primal dread washed over me, a feeling that the ancient magic stirring in the glade was unpredictable, and that the order everyone expected was about to be shattered. A hush fell, so sudden and complete, it was like the world had lost its breath. It wasn't the silence of respect, but of fear. He had arrived. Merrick Dravan, the Alpha King of the Northern clans, did not walk into the glade so much as he materialized from the ancient forest that bordered it. He moved with a predatory grace that belied his massive frame, a living embodiment of the winter storm his pack was named for. He was a creature of myth and nightmare, the king who had united warring packs through sheer, brutal force. Scars mapped his journey across his skin. A pale, jagged line cut through one dark eyebrow, and another disappeared beneath the high collar of his black leather tunic, hinting at a wound that should have been fatal. His presence was a physical force, sucking the warmth from the air, silencing the whispers, and making the hairs on my arms stand on end. He stopped before the High Elder, his gaze sweeping over the assembly with an unnerving stillness. His eyes were not the warm brown or amber of our pack. They were the color of glacial ice, flecked with silver that seemed to glow with their own internal light. When his gaze passed over me, it didn't even pause. I was invisible, a stone, a part of the scenery. The breath I hadn't realized I was holding escaped in a shaky sigh of relief. "Alpha King," the High Elder boomed, his voice straining to sound steady. "We welcome you. The Moon Goddess awaits your choice. May she bless this union and strengthen our people." Ilara stepped forward, sinking into a graceful curtsy. She lifted her head, her smile brilliant, her blue eyes shining with triumph. She was born for this moment, for this power. She held out her hand, a queen waiting for her king. The entire pack held its breath, ready for the inevitable conclusion. My father, standing with the other council members, puffed out his chest in pride. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. This was it. the culmination of 17 years of planning and grooming. Myrick's gaze fell upon my sister. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and for a heart-stopping second, I saw nothing in his expression. No desire, no recognition, no connection. It was the flat, assessing gaze of a predator examining something of little interest. The confidence in Alara's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Then he moved. He didn't walk toward her. His head turned, a slow, deliberate motion that seemed to take an eternity. His ice-chip eyes scanned the front rows of the pack, dismissing the daughters of alphas and betas who stood hopefully, their scents blooming with desperate invitation. He looked past the warriors, past the elders, his gaze cutting through the crowd like a scythe. I felt it before I saw it, a pull deep in my gut, a strange humming vibration under my skin, as if a forgotten string inside me had been plucked. My muted, dormant wolf, the part of me that had been silent since my failed first shift, stirred with a painful ache. And then his eyes found mine. The world tilted. The sounds of the glade, the crackling fires, the rustling leaves, the breathing of 100 wolves, all faded into a dull, distant roar. There was only the force of his stare, an inescapable gravity that pinned me in place. He wasn't just looking at me. He was seeing through me, peeling back the layers of shame and silence to the raw, terrified thing I kept hidden inside. I couldn't breathe. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of pure panic. Look away, my mind screamed, but my body was frozen, trapped in that devastatingly intense gaze. He started walking. A collective gasp swept through the pack. Murmurs erupted, confused and sharp. He walked past the altar. He walked past the horrified High Elder. He walked past my sister, whose beautiful face was beginning to crumble, her mask of perfect composure cracking to reveal disbelief and fury. He walked straight toward me. The wolves parted before him, scrambling to get out of his path. The space between us shrank with each heavy, deliberate footfall. His scent washed over me, overwhelming my senses. Not just pine and winter, but something more primal. Ozone after a lightning strike, cold, hard granite, the metallic tang of old blood. It was the scent of absolute, untamed power, and it terrified me as much as it called to something broken within me. He stopped less than a foot away, looming over me, a mountain of a man cloaked in shadow and menace. I had to crane my neck to see his face, and up close, the scars were more pronounced, the lines around his mouth harder. He lifted a hand and I flinched, my body tensing for a blow, a dismissal, an act of cruelty, but his touch was shockingly gentle. The rough, calloused pads of his fingers brushed a stray strand of brown hair from my cheek. The contact was like a brand, searing my skin, sending a jolt of terrifying, unfamiliar heat through my entire body. My wolf, my silent, pathetic wolf, whimpered within me, not in fear, but in something that sounded dangerously like recognition. His glacial eyes held mine, and in their depths, I saw a storm raging, a raw, possessive fire that had nothing to do with politics or alliances, and everything to do with something ancient and unbreakable. Without breaking eye contact, he spoke. His voice was a low, gravelly rumble that vibrated through the ground, through the very bones of my feet. It was not a request. It was a declaration, a sentence, a claim that echoed across the stunned silence of the glade, sealing my fate. She is mine. Chaos erupted. The word was a stone thrown into a still pond, and the ripples were waves of pandemonium. A shriek of pure, undiluted rage tore from my sister's throat. "No, it's me. I am the one." The elders surged forward, shouting questions, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of outrage. "Alpha King, what is the meaning of this? This is the disgraced one. She is an omega, a wolfless, a nothing." My father's face was ashen, his expression one of utter horror and humiliation. He looked from me to the king as if he'd just witnessed the world end. But Merrick heard none of it. He ignored them all. His entire focus was on me. His hand moved from my cheek to my arm, his grip strong and unyielding, an anchor in the storm of noise. He pulled me from the shadows and into the firelight, forcing me to his side, pressed against the hard planes of his body. I could feel the low, possessive growl vibrating in his chest, a warning to anyone who dared to challenge him. The scent of his fury was a palpable thing, sharp and dangerous, but it wasn't directed at me. It was for them, for all of them. He leaned down, his lips brushing the shell of my ear, his hot breath a stark contrast to the cold terror icing my veins. His voice was a quiet promise of violence, a dark vow meant only for me, spoken beneath the howls of my pack's outrage. "Let them scream," he murmured, his grip tightening, claiming me before the gods and the pack that had scorned me. "It changes nothing. You belong to me now." His words were a brand, his touch a shackle. Merrick Dravan did not wait for the council's blessing or my father's consent. He simply took me. His grip on my arm was an iron manacle as he pulled me through the pandemonium of the glade. My sister's face, contorted with a venomous hatred that eclipsed her beauty, was the last thing I saw clearly. Her scream echoed behind us, a promise of retribution. My father stood frozen, his face a mask of public ruin, while my mother crumpled into the arms of another Luna. They did not try to stop him. No one did. To challenge the Alpha King was to invite annihilation. His warriors, immense and silent as the stones of their homeland, materialized around us, forming a moving wall of black leather and hardened muscle. Their scents were sharp and foreign, frosted pine, cold iron, and the musk of a predator far more feral than any I had ever known. Their eyes, all shades of gray and silver, watched me with a mixture of suspicion and contempt. They saw what my pack saw, a weak, wolfless Omega who had somehow bewitched their king. I was a flaw, an impurity they were now forced to escort. I was thrust into a carriage that smelled of cedar and old leather. The door slammed shut, the sound as final as a coffin lid. Through the thick, leaded glass window, I watched the sacred glade of my home disappear, the ceremonial fires shrinking to distant, mocking embers. I was leaving everything I had ever known, not as a bride, but as spoils of war. The carriage lurched forward, its wheels grinding over the path, carrying me toward a future as cold and dark as the northern lands themselves. The journey was a blur of terror and suffocating silence. For 2 days we traveled without pause, stopping only to water the horses. I was given food and water by a grim-faced she-wolf with a scar that bisected her lip, who looked at me as if I were a particularly repulsive insect. She never spoke a word. I huddled in the corner of the carriage, wrapped in a thick fur blanket that did nothing to warm the chill that had settled deep in my bones. I could feel him out there, riding just ahead of the carriage. Merrick's presence was a constant, oppressive weight against my senses, a low hum of power that made the air itself feel heavy. My silent wolf, which had lain dormant for so long, was a knot of agonizing conflict within me, cowering from the sheer force of his alpha command, yet simultaneously drawn to it with a desperate, primal yearning I couldn't comprehend. It was a terrifying betrayal by my own spirit. The landscape changed dramatically on the 3rd day. The lush green forests of my home gave way to jagged peaks and sparse, hardy pines that clawed at the sky. The air grew thinner, sharper, tasting of ice and stone. We were entering his kingdom. His fortress, when it finally appeared, was not a castle, but a wound in the mountainside. Carved from the living black rock of the peak itself, Winterfang Keep was a monument to brutality and endurance. Towers like broken teeth scraped the bruised twilight sky, and its few windows were narrow slits, like the eyes of a predator watching from its lair. There were no banners, no welcoming lights, only stone and shadow. The carriage rattled through a massive iron gate and into a courtyard paved with dark, uneven stones. The air was frigid, and the silence here was different. It was a watchful, waiting silence. As I was pulled from the carriage, the warriors of the Winterstorm pack emerged from the shadows. They were larger than the wolves of my clan, their faces harder, their eyes colder. They lined the courtyard, their gazes stripping me bare, their thoughts a palpable wave of hostility. This is what he chose. This frail thing? This nothing? Merrick dismounted, his boots striking the stone with heavy finality. He walked toward me, the sea of hardened warriors parting before him. He stopped, his shadow falling over me, and for the first time since the ceremony, he addressed me directly. Come. It was not a request. He led the way into the keep, and I had no choice but to follow, my legs trembling so badly I was afraid I would collapse. The great hall was a cavern of cold air and echoing silence. The ceiling soared into darkness, supported by massive pillars of unadorned stone. Weapon racks lined the walls, holding axes, swords, and spears that looked ancient and well-used. A fire roared in a hearth large enough to roast a whole ox, but its heat did not reach the corners of the hall. It was a place built for kings and killers, not for comfort. He led me up a winding stone staircase, our footsteps the only sound in the oppressive stillness. We passed no one. It felt as if the keep itself was holding its breath. Finally, we reached a corridor lined with heavy, iron-banded oak doors. He stopped before the largest one at the very end of the hall. With a push, he swung it open and gestured for me to enter. I stepped inside and my breath caught. It was a cage, but it was a gilded one. The room was immense, larger than my family's entire den. A massive bed, piled high with white and gray furs, sat against the far wall. A fire crackled merrily in a stone hearth, casting a warm, flickering glow over everything. A low table was set with a flagon of what I assumed was wine, and a platter of bread and cheese. Rich tapestries depicting brutal hunting scenes hung on the stone walls, their threads absorbing the sound and adding to the strange insulated quiet. But it was the window that stole my attention. It took up nearly the entire wall, a single seamless pane of glass, looking out over a sheer 1,000-foot drop. The jagged peaks of the surrounding mountains tore at the sky, a breathtaking and terrifying vista of beautiful desolation. I was at the very top of the world and completely, utterly trapped. The heavy door clicked shut behind me. I spun around to see Merrick leaning against it, his arms crossed over his chest, his glacial eyes watching my every movement. The room, which had seemed so vast a moment ago, suddenly felt claustrophobically small. His presence filled it, consumed it, leaving no air for me to breathe. "You will be safe here," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the stone floor. Safe. The word was a bitter mockery. I was a prisoner, a trophy, a scandal he had dragged back to his lair. I wrapped my arms around myself, a feeble defense against the sheer force of him. He pushed off the door and began to pace the room slowly, like a wolf circling its prey. He didn't look at me, but I felt his gaze on me all the same. He ran a hand over the dark wood of the mantelpiece, his scarred fingers tracing the carvings. "You will have food, warmth, anything you require will be brought to you." His tone was flat, transactional, as if he were outlining the terms of my captivity. "Why?" The word escaped me, a raw, desperate whisper. It was barely audible, but in the thick silence of the room, it sounded like a shout. He stopped pacing and finally turned his full attention on me. The intensity of his stare was a physical blow, and I flinched. "Why what?" "Why me?" I forced myself to meet his eyes, my terror warring with a desperate need to understand. "My sister. She was the one. Strong, a true Luna. I am nothing. A disgrace to my bloodline. Wolfless?" I spat the last word out, the source of all my shame, laying my own worthlessness bare before him. Let him see his mistake. Let him see how little he had won. He closed the distance between us in 3 long, silent strides. He stood before me, so close I could feel the heat radiating from his body, could smell that intoxicating, terrifying scent of storm and stone. He lifted his hand and I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for a strike. Instead, I felt the rough pad of his thumb brush gently against my cheek, tracing the line of my jaw. My eyes flew open in shock. His face was a mask of unreadable emotion, but his silver-flecked eyes were blazing with a raw, possessive fire that went far beyond pack politics or alliances. It was something ancient, feral, and frighteningly personal. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a low, intimate growl that made the tiny hairs on my neck stand up. "You think I chose you for your strength? For your bloodline," he murmured, his thumb stroking my skin, sending shivers of pure, unadulterated fear down my spine. "Your pack cast you out. They draped you in shame and paraded you as a failure. They looked at you and saw a broken thing." He lowered his head until his lips were just a breath from mine. The power rolling off him was suffocating, primal, and my traitorous body trembled, not entirely from fear. "They were wrong," he whispered, his gaze dropping to my lips. "They saw weakness. I saw a survivor, and what my wolf wants." He paused, his eyes flickering with a darkness that promised things I couldn't begin to imagine. "My wolf takes." He straightened up abruptly, the warmth of his presence vanishing. He turned and walked back to the door without another word, his powerful shoulders blocking out the light from the hallway. My voice, stronger this time, called out to his back. "So I am your prisoner?" He stopped, his hand on the iron handle, but he did not turn around. "You are my Luna," he stated, the words cold and final. "Learn the difference." Then he was gone. The great oak door swung shut with a deafening thud. I heard the scrape of metal on metal, the heavy, resounding clank as a bolt was shot home from the outside. The sound echoed in the silent room, the final note in the symphony of my capture. I was alone, locked in a gilded cage at the heart of my enemy's fortress, the chosen of a king whose reasons were as terrifying and mysterious as the man himself. Days bled into one another in a haze of luxurious confinement. The sun rose and set outside my vast window, painting the jagged peaks in hues of rose and violet. A spectacular, silent show I watched from behind invisible bars. Food appeared outside my door on silent feet. Rich stews, dark bread, roasted meats. Far better than the simple fare I was used to. The fire was always tended, the furs on the bed always soft. I was a pampered pet, a treasured object, and a prisoner. I saw no one but the grim-faced she-wolf, Varya, who brought my meals and whose eyes held a universe of contempt. And I did not see the king. His absence was as loud as his presence had been. The keep was silent, but it was his silence. Imbued with his authority, I could still feel the phantom touch of his thumb on my skin, could hear his possessive growl in my ear. "You are my Luna." The words were a brand on my soul, a title I didn't want and couldn't comprehend. What did it mean to be Luna to a pack that despised me? To a king who locked me away? My pathetic, silent wolf paced the confines of my spirit, a miserable creature trapped in a cage within a cage, tormented by the ghost of an alpha's scent that permeated the very stones of my chamber. On the 5th day, the routine shattered. Varya entered my room without knocking, her scarred lip curled in a permanent sneer. She threw a bundle of dark, heavy fabric onto the bed. It was a dress of deep forest green wool, simple but exquisitely made, trimmed with black fur at the cuffs and collar. "The Alpha commands your presence in the great hall for the evening meal," she grunted, her voice as rough as gravel. "Be ready when the bells toll." She didn't wait for a response, turning on her heel and leaving, the door closing with its usual finality. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the dull ache of my solitude. The great hall, to face them all. The warriors who had looked at me with such loathing, the she-wolves whose sense would be sharp with challenge and disgust. It was a test, a deliberate unveiling. He was going to put his strange, broken prize on display. My hands trembled as I dressed. The wool was soft, but it felt like a shroud. I was a lamb being led to the slaughter, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of anger ignite in the pit of my stomach. Anger at him for this cruelty, anger at myself for this weakness. When the deep, resonant toll of a bell echoed through the stone corridors, Varya returned. She led me down the winding stairs, her posture stiff with disapproval. The closer we got to the great hall, the louder the sounds became. The clatter of plates, deep-voiced laughter, the low growl of conversation. The air grew thick with the smells of roasting boar, wood smoke, and the overwhelming territorial scent of 100 powerful, unfamiliar wolves. As we stepped through the massive archway, a sudden dead silence fell. Every head turned, every conversation died, every pair of eyes in that vast, fire-lit cavern fixed on me. It was the glade all over again, but 1,000 times worse. Here, I was not just a disgrace. I was the enemy, an intruder, a foreign sickness that had infected their king. I could feel their hostility as a physical force, a wave of pressure that threatened to crush me. Their scents were a symphony of aggression, sharp, musky, and challenging. Low growls rumbled from the long tables, barely suppressed warnings. I faltered, my feet refusing to move, my whole body frozen in the crosshairs of their collective hatred. "Move!" Varya hissed, shoving me forward. I stumbled into the hall, my gaze fixed on the floor, the rough-hewn flagstones swimming before my eyes. I could feel them watching my every step, judging my plain dress, my simple hair, my trembling hands. The walk to the head of the hall, where a massive throne-like chair sat empty at the head of a raised dais, felt like a mile. Then he was there. Myrick entered from a side door near the dais, and the atmosphere in the hall shifted instantly. The silent hostility directed at me was replaced by a tense, fearful deference to him. His presence commanded the space, his power a tangible thing that bent the will of everyone in the room. He wore simple black leather, but on him it looked like royal armor. His glacial eyes swept the room, and the remaining growls died in the wolves' throats. He did not look at me. He walked to the head table, taking his seat in the great chair carved with snarling wolves. Another, slightly smaller but still imposing chair sat beside his. It was empty, the silent expectation was suffocating. He wanted me to sit there, beside him, as his Luna. My legs felt like lead, but I forced them to move, climbing the few steps to the dais. My heart hammered against my ribs, each beat a painful thud in the echoing silence. I sank into the chair, the wood cold against my back, my hands clenched into fists in my lap. So close to him, I could feel the heat of his body, could smell the sharp, clean scent of winter that clung to him. Still, he did not look at me or speak. He simply raised a hand, a silent command. Instantly, the noise of the hall returned, but it was subdued now, cautious. Platters of food were set before us. I couldn't bring myself to eat. I could feel the eyes of the pack on us, watching, whispering. I risked a glance at the table nearest the dais. A group of his senior warriors were talking in low voices, their heads bent together. One of them, a brute with a flattened nose and a cruel mouth, glanced at me with open disgust before leaning toward his companion. I couldn't hear most of it, but a few words, carried on the strange acoustics of the hall, reached me as clearly as if they'd been whispered in my ear. "A barren king with a barren Luna, what's the point? Barren king." The words struck me like a physical blow, barren, unable to produce an heir. The whispers continued, weaving a tapestry of rumor and fact I couldn't untangle. The curse holds. No true heir will ever come from his line. So he brings this wolfless runt to warm his bed? An insult to the goddess. My blood ran cold. A curse. That's what they believed. That their mighty, fearsome alpha king was cursed to be the last of his line. And his choice of me, a wolfless omega presumed barren myself, was not just a strange political move, but a confirmation of his brokenness. He wasn't choosing a Luna to bear his pups and secure his legacy. He was choosing an empty vessel for an empty throne. The humiliation I felt was suddenly overshadowed by a chilling, terrifying clarity. This was why he had ignored my perfect, fertile sister. Her strengths would have only highlighted his lack. He had chosen me because I mirrored his own perceived failure. Suddenly, a heavy warmth settled on my thigh. I flinched, my head snapping to the side. Under the cover of the heavy table, Myrick had placed his hand on my leg, his thumb stroking slowly, possessively, over the wool of my dress. The touch was electric, a stark contrast to his cold, distant demeanor. His gaze remained fixed on the hall before him, his expression unreadable stone, but his touch was a secret, intimate claim, a silent message that defied the whispers. You are mine. It doesn't matter what they say. The touch did not comfort me. It terrified me. It was the touch of a jailer, not a mate, a reminder of his ownership, of the fact that my body was no longer my own. I sat rigid, enduring the slow, deliberate caress, my skin burning where he touched me, the whispers of the pack and the weight of his hand threatening to suffocate me entirely. When the meal was over, he rose, and I rose with him, a puppet on his strings. Varya appeared at my side instantly, ready to escort me back to my cage. But Myrick stopped her with a single sharp glance. I will see her to her chambers, he said, his voice low and final. The walk back up the stairs was steeped in a thick, vibrating tension. He walked beside me, not touching me, but his proximity was an overwhelming force. The silence stretched, pulled taut between us, filled with all the things that had not been said in the hall. When we reached my door, I turned to face him, my earlier anger returning, sharpened by the pack's scorn and the mystery of his curse. I would not be his silent, broken doll. They call you the Baron King, I said, my voice shaking but clear. I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, a flash of raw, unguarded pain so profound it stole my breath. It was there and then gone, replaced by an icy mask of fury. You listen to the gossip of dogs? He snarled, his voice a dangerous growl. Is it true? I pressed, fueled by a reckless desperation. Is that why you chose me? Because a broken Omega is a fitting match for a cursed king? He moved faster than I thought possible, slamming me back against the heavy oak of the door. The impact knocked the wind from me. He braced his hands on the wood on either side of my head, caging me in, his body a wall of hard muscle. His face was inches from mine, his glacial eyes blazing with a storm of rage, and something darker, something that looked like agony. You know nothing of my curse, he hissed, his voice raw with a pain he clearly never showed to anyone. The scent of his fury filled the air, acrid and potent. You think this is about politics? About matching failures? He lowered his head, his breath hot against my cheek, his lips brushing my ear. The barely controlled violence in him was terrifying, yet beneath it, I sensed a deep aching wound. You want to know the truth of it, Lysandra? He whispered, his voice dropping to a tormented growl. You want to see what they whisper about in the shadows. His hand went to the high collar of his leather tunic. His fingers, rough and scarred, worked at the laces, his knuckles brushing the skin of his own throat. The fury in his eyes was warring with a bleak, desolate resolve. He was going to show me. He was going to lay his curse bare. Then look, he commanded, his voice breaking on the word. Look at what makes a king barren. My breath hitched, trapped in my throat. His fingers, surprisingly steady, despite the tempest raging in his eyes, pulled the last lace free. The high protective collar of his tunic fell open. He didn't move, didn't force me to look. He simply stood there, his body caging mine against the door. His eyes locked on mine, challenging me, daring me to see the truth he had kept hidden beneath layers of leather and a fearsome reputation. Slowly, hesitantly, my gaze dropped from his tormented eyes to his throat. A gasp tore from my lips, sharp and involuntary. It wasn't a scar. Scars were pale, dead tissue, the remnants of a healed wound. This was something else entirely. A web of angry, raised flesh, darker than his skin, snaked up from his collarbone, wrapping around the strong column of his neck like a thorny vine. The tissue was puckered and twisted, but it was the color that was so unnatural. It was a deep, bruised purple, shot through with veins that seemed to pulse with a faint, sickly black light, like a creeping poison frozen just beneath the surface of his skin. It looked raw, painful, and profoundly wrong. It was a mark of corruption, a brand of dark magic that seemed to writhe even in stillness. This was his curse, Not a lack, not an emptiness, but an active, malevolent blight upon his very being. My mind reeled. The whispers in the great hall hadn't been mere gossip. They were a pale, watered-down version of a horrifying truth. No wonder they called him Baron. What she-wolf, what wolf could bond with this? What life could spring from a body tainted by such a virulent poison? I reached out, my fingers trembling, my actions driven by an instinct I didn't understand. It wasn't pity, it was something deeper, a strange, horrifying echo of recognition. Before I could think better of it, my fingertips brushed against the edge of the mark. A jolt, sharp and violent as a lightning strike, shot up my arm. It wasn't his magic that shocked me, it was mine. Or rather, the ghost of it. The dormant, silent wolf within me, the part of my soul I had believed dead and buried, screamed. It was a silent, agonizing shriek of pure, unadulterated agony that ripped through my consciousness. An image flashed behind my eyes, a memory not my own. Darkness, the scent of burning herbs and blood, a silver blade etched with writhing runes, and a pain so absolute it had no sound. It was his pain, his memory, and for a fraction of a second, I felt it as if it were my own. I snatched my hand back as if I'd been burned, stumbling away from him as he released me. I clutched my chest, my heart hammering, my breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. What was that? What had just happened? Merrick stared at me, his face a mask of stunned disbelief. The raw fury had vanished, replaced by a dawning, incredulous wonder. He looked from my terrified face to his own hand, then back to the mark on his neck. "What did you feel?" he demanded, his voice a low, urgent rumble. I couldn't speak. I just shook my head, backing away until my legs hit the heavy wooden frame of the bed. The phantom pain of that ancient cursed wound still echoed in my soul. It felt familiar, a terrifying, impossible familiarity. "Tell me," he commanded, taking a step toward me. "Pain," I finally choked out, my voice raspy. "I felt your pain." He stopped, his glacial eyes widening almost imperceptibly. He looked at me then, truly looked at me, as if he were seeing me for the first time. Not as the disgraced Omega, not as a political pawn, not even as his chosen Luna, but as something else entirely, a key, a mystery no one has ever... He began, his voice rough with an emotion I couldn't name. He didn't finish the thought, but he didn't have to. No one had ever touched his curse and lived to speak of it, let alone felt what he felt. The air between us crackled, thick with unspoken questions and a terrifying new possibility. My wolflessness, my shame, my brokenness, was it connected to his curse? Was this why his wolf had cried out for mine in the glade? Not because I was a survivor, as he'd claimed, but because our wounds somehow spoke the same language. The scent in the room shifted. Beneath the ever-present notes of winter and stone, a new fragrance began to bloom, faint but unmistakable. It was coming from me, the scent of rain-soaked earth after a long drought, the smell of dormant life, stirring. Merrick's nostrils flared, his head tilted, his eyes narrowing as he focused on me, his predator's senses analyzing, dissecting. "Your scent," he growled, his voice thick with confusion and something else, something that sounded like hope. He took another step and another until he stood before me where I had collapsed onto the edge of the bed. He knelt, bringing his face level with mine. The intensity of his gaze was overwhelming, but it was no longer just possessive. It was searching, desperate. "When did your wolf fall silent, Lysandra?" he asked, his voice softer now, but laced with an urgency that vibrated through me. "My first shift," I whispered, the memory of familiar agony. "It never came. The pack's shaman said the connection was severed, that the moon goddess had rejected me. The shame of it was a physical weight pressing down on me. Rejected you or stolen from you?" he countered, his eyes boring into mine. His gaze flickered down to my throat, as if searching for a mark that mirrored his own. The idea was so foreign, so contrary to everything I had been taught to believe, that my mind struggled to grasp it. Stolen? My wolf hadn't failed me, it had been taken. The memory of the pain I'd felt from his curse flashed again. The silver blade, the dark magic. Was it possible? Could the same darkness that had blighted him have somehow broken me? Without a word, he reached out and gently took my hand. His large, calloused palm enveloped my smaller one, his thumb stroking the delicate skin of my wrist. There was no jolt this time, only a profound humming warmth that spread through my veins, chasing away some of the deep, soul-level chill I had lived with for years. It was a feeling of connection, of rightness, that was as terrifying as it was intoxicating. The dormant part of me, my broken wolf, uncurled a little from its tight ball of misery, drawn to the heat, to the strength in his hand. It whimpered, a soft questioning sound in the back of my mind. They told me the curse would prevent a true bond, he murmured, more to himself than to me, his gaze fixed on our joined hands. They said no wolf would ever answer mine. He looked up, and the raw vulnerability in his eyes struck me to my core. The fearsome alpha king, the brutal conqueror, was stripped bare in that moment, revealing the desperate, lonely man beneath. "But yours does," he whispered. "Even in its silence, it answers." This was the truth. This was the reason. He hadn't chosen me out of strategy or pity. His wolf, tainted by a curse that isolated him from his own kind, had recognized my wolf, muted by a separate, yet perhaps related tragedy. Two broken halves of a whole, calling to each other across a crowded glade, drawn together by a shared wound. It wasn't a romance. It was a desperate act of fate, a gamble by two souls on the brink of oblivion. He raised my hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to my knuckles. The touch was not one of passion, but of reverence. It was a solemn acknowledgement of the thread of destiny that had, against all odds, woven our lives together. The scent of damp earth, of life, grew stronger around me, a fragile perfume of possibility in the cold stone room. "I do not know what magic did this to us," he said, his voice a low, steady vow as he met my gaze. "But I swear on the souls of my ancestors, I will find out. I will not let you remain broken." He stood and turned to leave, but this time, as his hand touched the door, I called out to him, my voice trembling but sure. "Marek." He paused, his back to me. "Don't lock it," I said. "Please." He was still for a long moment. I watched the powerful line of his shoulders, the tension in his stance. Then, without turning, he gave a single sharp nod. He pulled the door open and walked out, leaving it slightly ajar. The quiet click of the latch settling, but not locking, was the most profound sound I had ever heard. It wasn't freedom, not yet, but it was a beginning. It was a choice. And for the first time since being stolen from my home, I felt a flicker not of fear, but of a fragile, terrifying hope. The unlocked door changed everything and nothing. I was still a captive in a foreign keep, surrounded by a pack that saw me as a curse-bearer's consort. But the absence of the heavy, final clank of the bolt was a breath of air in a suffocating room. It was a concession, a fragile bridge of trust, built between two broken souls in the dark. I spent the next days in a state of suspended animation, the memory of his raw vulnerability and the phantom pain of his curse replaying in my mind. The scent of damp earth, of potential, clung to me, a constant reminder that something inside me, long believed dead, was stirring. Marek did not come to my chambers again, but his presence was a constant weight on the keep. I could feel his movements through the stone floors, a low thrum of power that was a part of the fortress itself. I no longer felt his rage or his cold distance, but a roiling sea of conflict, a fierce protectiveness warring with a deep-seated caution. He was wrestling with the hope I represented, afraid to believe in it, yet unable to dismiss the connection that had flared between us. Varya still brought my meals, but the open contempt in her eyes had been replaced by a grudging, confused curiosity. She would set the tray down and linger for a moment, her gaze sweeping over me as if searching for some outward sign of the change Merrick had clearly sensed. The whispers in the great hall did not cease, but their tone shifted. The certainty of their scorn was now tinged with unease. Their alpha had not brought back a broken toy to discard. He had brought back a puzzle, and its pieces were beginning to move. One evening, restless and unable to bear the confines of my room another moment, I pushed open the heavy oak door. The corridor was empty, lit by flickering torches that cast long, dancing shadows on the stone walls. My heart hammered with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. I was breaking the unspoken rules of my confinement. Every instinct screamed at me to retreat to the safety of my gilded cage. But a stronger, more reckless impulse urged me forward. I had to know this place. I had to understand the world that had shaped the scarred, cursed king who now held my fate in his hands. I walked on silent feet, my senses on high alert. The keep at night was a different beast. The sounds were muted, the distant crackle of the great hall fire, the low murmur of voices from the barracks, the sigh of the wind through the high mountain passes. The scents were sharper, cold stone, burning wood, and the ever-present musk of the winter storm pack, a territorial aroma that made the fine hairs on my arms stand up. I followed a staircase downward, drawn by a faint, rhythmic sound. Clang, 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 the sound of a hammer striking an anvil. It led me away from the main living quarters, down to the very roots of the mountain. The air grew warmer, thick with the smells of hot metal, sweat, and coal smoke. I found myself standing in the shadows of a massive archway, looking into the heart of the keep's forge. The room was a cavern of fire and shadow. Flames roared in a dozen hearths, casting a demonic orange glow on the soot-stained walls. Sparks flew like angry fireflies as massive, bare-chested wolves hammered glowing steel into the shape of blades and armor. This was where the pack's strength was forged, in the heat and the violence of the fire. And in the center of it all, stripped to the waist, was Merrick. He was not watching, he was working. He stood before the largest anvil, his back to me. The firelight danced over the corded muscles of his back and shoulders, muscles that bunched and coiled with each powerful swing of the heavy smith's hammer. Sweat glistened on his skin, tracing the paths of old scars that crisscrossed his back like a road map of forgotten battles. He was a vision of raw, untamed power, a king who was not afraid to do the work of his people, to shape the very weapons they would wield. He was so completely absorbed in his task that he didn't notice me. He lifted a glowing piece of metal from the coals with a pair of long tongs, laid it on the anvil, and brought the hammer down. Clang, the sound was deafening, a peal of thunder that vibrated through my bones. Sparks showered the stone floor around him. He worked with a fierce, focused grace, his movements economical and precise. This was a different kind of power than the cold authority he wielded as king. This was primal, creative, and destructive all at once. As I watched, mesmerized, he turned to quench the blade in a trough of dark water. Steam hissed violently, and in that moment he saw me. His body went still, the hammer held loosely in his hand. His glacial eyes, glowing in the firelight, locked onto mine across the roaring forge. The other smiths fell silent, their hammers ceasing, the sudden quiet almost as loud as the noise had been. They all turned to look at me, their faces grim and suspicious, their bare chests heaving. Merrick didn't snarl or command me to leave. He simply held my gaze for a long moment, an unreadable expression on his face. Then he set the hammer down with a soft thud and walked toward me, wiping the sweat from his brow with the back of a leather-gloved hand. He moved with the same predatory grace I remembered from the glade, a wolf in his element, the firelight casting his half-naked form in stark relief. The twisted, dark mark of his curse was stark, against the fire-warmed skin of his neck and chest, a brand of shadow on a body built for war. He stopped just before me, close enough that I could feel the intense heat rolling off his skin, smell the intoxicating mix of sweat, smoke, and his own unique winter scent. "You should not be down here," he said, his voice a low rumble, but it held no anger, only a rough, weary note of surprise. I couldn't stay in that room, I answered, my voice barely a whisper. Yet it carried in the charged silence. His eyes searched my face, then flickered past me, up the dark staircase I had descended. No, I suppose you couldn't. He seemed to understand in that moment that caging something was not the same as protecting it. One of the other smiths, the brute with the flattened nose from the great hall, stepped forward. His name was Jorund, Merrick's beta and master of the forge. Alpha, he growled, his eyes fixed on me with undisguised hostility. The Omega whelp is not welcome in the heart of the keep. Merrick turned his head slowly, pinning Jorund with a look so cold it could have frozen the flames in the hearth. The temperature in the forge seemed to drop 20 degrees. She is not an Omega whelp, he stated, his voice dangerously soft. She is my Luna, and she is welcome wherever she chooses to be. Do you understand me, Jorund? The massive beta paled, the bravado draining from his face. He bowed his head, his submission absolute. Yes, Alpha. Forgive me. Merrick turned back to me, the icy fury vanishing as if it had never been. He held out a hand, his palm rough and calloused, stained with soot. It was not a command. It was an invitation. After a heartbeat's hesitation, I placed my hand in his. His fingers closed around mine, his grip firm and warm, engulfing my smaller hand completely. Come, he said, and led me not back up the stairs to my room, but further into the forge. He led me past the wary eyes of his warriors, to the anvil where he had been working. The blade he had been shaping lay on the stone beside it, a piece of raw, deadly potential. He picked it up with his free hand. It was a dagger, its form still rough, but the lines were elegant and lethal. Every leader in my line has forged his own blade, he explained. His voice, low, meant only for me. It is our way. We do not inherit power. We shape it with our own hands, through fire and sweat and will. He looked from the blade to me, and I saw a profound connection being made in his mind. Fire, sweat, will, a will to reshape a broken thing. My father believed the curse was a punishment from the gods for his own weakness, Merrick said, his voice laced with old bitterness. He touched the dark mark on his neck. He saw it as an end, a finality. He let it rule him. He let it kill him from the inside out. His grip on my hand tightened. I will not. I have fought it my entire life. I have built this pack, united the clans, made myself stronger than any alpha before me, all in defiance of this filth. The self-loathing in his voice was a raw, open wound. And now you, he murmured, his thumb stroking the back of my hand. You who felt it, who answered it. You are not a finality, Lysandra. You are a beginning, a weapon I did not know I was missing. His words sent a tremor through me. A weapon. He saw me as a weapon against his own curse. The idea was terrifying, but it was also the first time in my life anyone had seen me as anything other than a liability. He didn't see weakness. He saw a strange, untested strength that mirrored his own. He set the dagger down and, turning to face me fully, used his free hand to gently cut my jaw. The soot on his fingers left a faint, dark smudge on my skin. He leaned in, his forehead coming to rest against mine. We stood there for a long moment, wreathed in the smoke and heat of the forge, surrounded by silent, stunned warriors, two broken souls finding a strange solace in each other's scars. I am not a weapon, I whispered, my voice trembling. He pulled back just enough to look into my eyes, his own burning with a fierce, protective light. No, he corrected me, his voice a rough, solemn vow. You are the fire that will forge one. The forge became my sanctuary. It was a strange and unlikely haven, a place of blistering heat and deafening noise. Yet it was the only room in Winterfang Keep where I felt I could breathe. Myrek never forbade me from coming, and after his chilling rebuke of Jorund, none of the other warriors dared to challenge my presence. They watched me, their suspicion still a palpable force, but it was now mingled with a reluctant, fearful respect. I was the Alpha's chosen enigma, and they did not know what to make of me. I spent hours sitting on a stone bench in the shadows, watching them work. I learned the rhythms of the forge, the hiss of hot steel in the quenching trough, the ringing chorus of hammers on anvils, the roar of the bellows breathing life into the flames. I learned the sense of coal smoke, hot iron, and the sweat of hard labor. I learned the names of the smiths, Jorund, the gruff beta who now gave me curt, respectful nods, old Kale, whose hands were gnarled but impossibly steady, young Torvin, whose ambition burned as hot as the fires he tended. Most of all, I watched Merrick. He was a different man here, stripped of his kingly burdens and reduced to the primal elements of fire and steel. He worked with a relentless, punishing intensity, as if he could hammer the curse from his own body, shaping his rage and pain into something sharp and useful. The angry dark mark on his neck seemed to pulse in the firelight, a constant reminder of the shadow he fought against. Our interactions were sparse, often wordless. He would bring me a ladle of cool water, his calloused fingers brushing mine as I took it. He would sometimes pause his work, turning to meet my gaze across the forge, a silent question in his eyes. "Are you still here?" And I would give a small nod. I am still here. It was a fragile, unspoken language, a bond being forged in the heat, beat by beat, alongside the blades. My own inner world was in turmoil. The stirring I had felt in my dormant wolf was growing, a faint, persistent hum beneath the surface of my consciousness. It was like feeling a phantom limb, an echo of a power I had never been allowed to know. Sometimes, when Myrek's hammer struck the anvil with a particularly resonant clang, I would feel a sympathetic vibration deep in my bones, a painful, yearning ache. One afternoon, a messenger arrived at the forge, his face pale with urgency. He spoke in low, clipped tones to Merrick, his words lost in the din, but the shift in the Alpha King was immediate. The focused smith vanished, replaced by the cold, dangerous ruler. The air crackled with his authority. He barked orders to Jorund, his voice a weapon in itself, and the forge began to empty as warriors armed themselves and prepared to ride out. "What is it?" I asked, approaching him as he strapped on his leather armor. His face was a grim mask, his glacial eyes hard as diamonds. "Border skirmish. The feral clans to the south are testing our strength again. It is nothing, but it must be answered." He spoke as if trying to reassure me, but the tension in his shoulders told a different story. These were not simple skirmishes. They were probes, constant tests against the strength of the cursed king. He was about to turn and leave when he paused. He looked at me, a flicker of profound conflict in his eyes. The thought of leaving me here, unprotected in a keep that still didn't fully accept me, was clearly a torment to him. He was the only thing standing between me and the pack's scorn. "Varya will attend you," he said, his voice tight. "You will remain in your chambers until I return." The words, meant to be protective, felt like a cage door slamming shut. A return to the gilded prison, to the silence and the waiting. An old familiar helplessness washed over me. Before I could censor myself, the words tumbled out, laced with a desperation that surprised even me. "Take me with you." He stared at me as if I had lost my mind. Jorund, who was strapping a massive axe to his own back, let out a snort of derisive laughter. "The battlefield is no place for an Omega, little bird. You would be torn apart before the first sword is drawn." Humiliation, hot and sharp, pricked at my skin. He was right. What could I do? I was wolfless, untrained, a liability. But the thought of being left behind, of being useless, was more terrifying than any battle. Marek did not laugh. He looked at me, his gaze intense, searching. He saw the desperation in my eyes, the fierce, defiant spark that refused to be extinguished. He saw the fire of the forge reflected there. "She is not going to the battlefield, Jorund," Merrick said, his voice dropping to a low, commanding growl that silenced his beta instantly. He turned his full attention back to me. "But she will not be locked away either." He made a decision then, one that would change everything. "The hunting lodge in the high pass," he said, more to himself than to me. "It is secure, close enough that I can feel you, far enough from the fighting." He looked at Jorund. "You will stay. You and 10 of our best. Guard her with your lives. If a single hair on her head is harmed, I will peel the skin from your bones myself." The threat was delivered with such chilling, absolute sincerity that Jorund swallowed hard, his face losing all its color. He nodded, his eyes wide. "Yes, Alpha." The journey to the lodge was a blur of wind and speed. Merrick did not put me in a carriage. He lifted me onto the saddle of his own massive warhorse, a beast as black and formidable as its master. I sat before him, cradled against the hard planes of his chest, his arms a secure cage around me. The proximity was overwhelming, intimate, and deeply unsettling. I was acutely aware of the steady, powerful beat of his heart against my back, of the scent of leather, horse, and his own unique winter storm essence filling my senses. The rhythmic movement of the horse, the power of the man holding me, the wild, untamed landscape rushing past. It was a sensory overload that was both terrifying and exhilarating. The lodge was a rustic, formidable structure of dark timber and stone, nestled high in a snowy pass, surrounded by ancient, silent pines. It was a fortress in miniature, built for function, not comfort. As Merrick's war party thundered away, leaving me with Jorund and his 10 warriors, a profound sense of isolation settled over me. I was high above the world, trapped between a battle I couldn't fight and a keep that wasn't my home. Jorund was a man transformed. The weight of his alpha's command had settled on him like a shroud. He was no longer the scornful brute from the forge, but a grim, focused guardian. He posted sentries, secured the perimeter, and spoke to me only to give clipped, formal reports. "The perimeter is secure, Luna. You are safe." The title felt strange and hollow on his tongue. That night, I couldn't sleep. The wind howled around the lodge like a hungry wolf, and my mind was filled with images of Merrick in battle. A primal fear, one I had never known before, gripped me. It was a fear for him. The thought of his life being extinguished, of that fierce, tormented light in his eyes going dark, was an unbearable agony. It was the fear of a mate for her alpha, a feeling my broken wolf should not have been capable of. I stood before the hearth, the fire casting flickering shadows on the rough-hewn walls. The ache inside me, the hum of my dormant wolf, intensified until it was a physical pain. It wanted to answer the call of its alpha, who was miles away, fighting, bleeding. It wanted to break free. A sudden sharp cry from one of the sentries outside shattered the night. Jorund burst into the main room, his hand on the hilt of his axe. "Ferals," he snarled. "A scout party. They must have slipped past the main force." Panic, cold and sharp, seized me. The sounds of fighting erupted outside, the clash of steel, the guttural snarls of wolves in their fighting forms, the screams of the wounded. Jorund and his men drew their weapons, their faces grim. They were outnumbered. This wasn't a skirmish, it was a targeted attack. They had come for me. They had come for the Alpha King's one vulnerability. Jorund shoved me toward the back of the lodge. "Stay here, Luna. We will hold them." He and his warriors formed a defensive line at the main door, a wall of muscle and steel against the coming storm. The heavy wooden door splintered, then burst inward under a massive blow. 3 huge, mangy-looking wolves, their eyes glowing with feral madness, charged into the room. Jorund met the first one, his axe cleaving its skull in a shower of blood and bone. But there were too many. Another warrior went down, his throat torn out. I was trapped, useless. My body was frozen in terror, my mind screaming. Then I saw it. One of the ferals, a scarred beast with milky white eyes, slipped past the fighting, its gaze fixed on me. It lowered its head, saliva dripping from its jaws, and launched itself across the room, a blur of mangy fur and razor-sharp teeth. There was no time to think, no time for fear. As the creature soared through the air toward me, something inside me broke, the dormant, silent part of my soul. the wolf that had been stolen, caged, and muted for years, ripped free with a shriek of pure, untamed fury. It was not a physical transformation. It was a detonation of spirit. Power, raw and blue-white like the heart of a winter storm, erupted from me. The air crackled, the temperature in the room plummeted, and the fire in the hearth flared with an ethereal blue light. The attacking feral was blasted backward, as if it had hit a solid wall, slamming into the far side of the room with a sickening crunch. It lay still, its fur smoking. The room fell silent. The remaining ferals, the winter storm warriors, Jorund, everyone stared at me in stunned, terrified awe. I stood with my arms outstretched, my breath pluming in the suddenly frigid air, my eyes glowing with the same blue-white light that pulsed around me. I could feel it, my wolf. It was awake. It was roaring. And it was not the gentle spirit of an omega. It was something ancient, wild, and fiercely, terrifyingly powerful. My gaze met Jorun's. The scorn was gone. The confusion was gone. In its place was a look of profound, primal reverence. He dropped to one knee, bowing his head, not to a king's consort, but to a force of nature he could not comprehend. Luna Kuo, he breathed, his voice filled with a wonder that bordered on worship. The storm, it is in you. 2 winters had passed since the night my power awakened in the High Pass. 2 years since Merrick returned from battle, not to a broken Omega, but to a Luna whose spirit roared with the same ancient storm that coursed through his own bloodline. The tale of that night had become legend in the pack, whispered in the great hall and sung by the hearths. They no longer called me the wolfless Omega. They called me the storm awakened, the silent fury, the Luna who held the heart of winter in her soul. Winterfang Keep was no longer a cage. It was home. The cold stones now held the warmth of belonging. The silence was filled with the easy familiarity of a pack that had finally fully accepted me as their own. Jorund was my staunchest ally, his loyalty absolute, forged in the blue fire of my awakening. Varya, the grim-faced she-wolf, now smiled at me, a strange and wonderful cracking of her scarred face, and brought me hot tea in the mornings without being asked. My power was a wild, untamed thing, and Merrick became my anchor. Together we explored the depths of our shared magic. We learned that the curse that had blighted his bloodline and the magic that had severed me from my wolf were 2 sides of the same dark coin, cast by an ancient rival pack long ago. His curse was meant to isolate and wither his line. Mine was meant to hide the very power that could break it. The sorcerer who cast it had intended for our bloodlines to run parallel forever, broken and barren. But he had not accounted for the fierce, stubborn pull of fate, for a bond that would refuse to be denied. Touching Merrick's mark no longer caused me pain. Instead, when I laid my hand over the dark, twisted flesh on his neck, my own power would flow into him, a cool, soothing balm of moonlight and winter frost. The angry purple had begun to recede, the black veins fading like ink in water. The process was slow, agonizingly so, but it was working. We were healing each other, our broken pieces fitting together to make a whole stronger and more powerful than either of us had ever been alone. The whispers of the barren king had died, replaced by odd murmurs about the alpha whose Luna was his cure. Tonight was the night of the winter solstice, the longest night of the year. A thick blanket of fresh snow covered the mountains, muffling the world in a profound, peaceful silence. The sky was a canopy of black velvet, studded with the impossibly bright cold diamonds of the winter stars. The full moon, a perfect, luminous pearl, bathed the landscape in its ethereal silver light. Merrick and I stood on the balcony of our chambers, the same room that had once been my gilded cage. The vast window was thrown open to the biting cold, but we didn't feel it. A gentle aura of our combined magic kept the worst of the chill at bay. I leaned back against his chest, his arms wrapped securely around my waist, his chin resting on the top of my head. He was no longer just a king or a warrior or a jailer. He was my husband, my mate, the other half of my soul. "Do you remember the first night?" I asked. my voice a soft murmur in the quiet. In the glade, I was so afraid of you. I felt the low rumble in his chest as he chuckled, a sound I had come to cherish. And I was afraid of the hope you made me feel, he confessed, his lips brushing against my hair. I had lived in the darkness for so long, I had forgotten what moonlight felt like. He turned me in his arms, his glacial eyes, which I now knew could hold such warmth, searching my face. The scars that had once seemed so terrifying were now just a part of the man I loved, each line a testament to his strength and survival. He traced the line of my jaw with a calloused thumb, a touch that no longer sparked fear, but a deep, resonant hum of belonging. "They brought you to me as a shadow, Lysandra," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. A reminder of failure. They didn't know they were bringing the moon to a king who had only ever known night. My wolf, now a constant, powerful presence within me, purred in contentment, its spirit intertwined with the fierce, protective wolf that resided in him. We were no longer two separate beings, but a single, balanced entity. His was the storm, mine the calm eye within it. His the fire of the forge, mine the cool water that gave the steel its strength. "My sister sent word last month," I said quietly. "She is mated to the alpha of a southern pack." The letter was formal, strained, but it was not filled with hatred. I think perhaps she is finally finding her own path. "Her path was never meant to be yours," Merrick said, his gaze unwavering. "This was always yours, written in the stars long before either of us was born." He leaned down and kissed me, a slow, deep kiss filled with the promises of 1,000 nights to come. It was a kiss of healing and of triumph, a testament to a love that had been forged in scandal and shame, tempered in fire and magic, and had emerged as strong and enduring as the mountains themselves. When we broke apart, we stood in comfortable silence, watching the moonlight spill across the snow-covered peaks of his kingdom, our kingdom. In the valley below, the lights of Winterfang Keep glowed with warmth and life. It was a home built by a cursed king, now ruled by that king and the moon that had answered his call. I was no longer the disgraced Omega, and he was no longer the barren king. We were simply Merrick and Lysandra, and our story, once a tale of sorrow and scandal, had become the North's greatest song.